Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the ACT branch of the AIIA. My name is Heath McMichael and I'm branch president. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to elders past and present. Something that concerns us all, peace and security, are the headline topics for this evening's discussion. In particular, we will be looking at the important role of the United Nations in pursuing binding solutions to the transnational challenges of our time: nuclear weapons proliferation, climate change, erosion of biodiversity, cyber threats, the rise of artificial intelligence, and pandemics. We've all heard of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists' Doomsday Clock, with its famous seconds before midnight. I think it's currently 90 seconds, by the way. Depiction of impending Holocaust. Well, with the clock ticking down, what part can Australia play in strengthening the UN's resolve to preserve the welfare of humanity? To address these questions, we're very fortunate to have with us tonight someone with a lifetime of experience in social justice activism at home and abroad. Russell Rollason is an advisor to the University of Melbourne Initiative for Peace Building and treasurer of the Australian Peace and Security Forum. He's been involved with civil society for more than 20 years, including as executive director of ACTFOA, now the Australian Council for International Development, where actually I recall we sometimes exchange pleasantries on the Australian government's stance on Indonesia's occupation of East Timor back in the day. In 2005, Russell joined the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, where he led the establishment of the Australian Water Partnership and was posted to a key development position in the Australian High Commission in New Delhi. Beyond DFAT, Russell led 2 Asian Development Bank projects in Asia. He was appointed a member of the Order of Australia in 1998 for services to international development and humanitarian aid. He is a Science Honours graduate from the University of Queensland. Now, as per our normal format, Russell will speak for about 20 minutes, Russell? Yeah. Before we go to questions from participants in-house and those of you online, using the Q&A function on Zoom. And we anticipate finishing at 7 p.m. So now let me hand over to Russell.
Thanks very much, Heath. I'll time myself. So thank you.
Thank you. 2 of us. Yes.
Thank you for inviting me tonight. And thank you for that very generous introduction. I hope I can live up to a portion of it. So it's a broad topic, and I think I should use this. So I'm partly going to cover the preparations for the UN Summit, or Summit of the Future, going to look at what we've been doing in Australia to try and prepare for it. And then I also want to introduce briefly at the end this new organisation that's a forum on peace and security for Australia, which we hope will obviously have good relationships with the Institute for International Affairs, but some of you may also be interested. So let me go in that one. Any particular direction? There we go.
I think Emily can do that for you, Russell.
Okay, great.
Okay, there we go.
So all of you here will realise we're in troubled times. Things aren't going right in the world at the moment. In fact, a lot of things are going wrong. So climate disruption, I don't need to say a lot about that. I'm sure you're all pretty well aware. It's interesting that, a fortnight ago now, we had the hottest day ever recorded on Earth, 52.9 degrees in a township near New Delhi. We were in New Delhi when it was 46 for a week, and we thought that was pretty hot. 52 is quite something else. 60,000 deaths due to heat waves in Europe in 2022. Heat is the thing that kills people. We hear about the fires and the floods, but it's the heat that really brings a high death toll. So climate disruption, huge challenge. Global peace and security, conflict in Gaza, conflict in Ukraine, conflict in Sudan. And none of these can be solved by 1 or 2 countries working together or against each other. It needs something else to bring peace and security in our world. Really needs some international cooperation. Meanwhile, global arms sales have just passed $4.2 trillion per annum. So it's not we're short of resources, perhaps we're not directing them in the right direction. New technologies, AI, The conflict in Gaza and Ukraine has seen extensive use of artificial intelligence, weapons, particularly targeting in Gaza, more so in Ukraine, with automated weapon systems. The threat of automated weapon systems is growing rapidly. Australia too gets involved in automated weapon systems. We've got an industry here. We all focus on the first AUKUS in the AUKUS box and dice. We all focus on Pillar 1. Pillar 2 needs to be worried about as well. Pillar 2 has broader cooperation and it's very much focused around artificial intelligence and weapons. So start reading a little when you can. There's very little available, but start looking at what AUKUS second pillar is about. Global economics. 8 men in this world have the same wealth as half the world's population. I mean, it's just extraordinary to think of what's happening globally in the economic world, to see this enormous accumulation of wealth in fewer and fewer hands. The top 1%, this is 81 billionaires, own almost half the world's wealth. The bottom half owns just 0.75%. This inequality in the way the world's developing, think about what's it going to lead to? It's going to lead to conflict. It's going to lead to people moving, that's for sure. Migration is an issue already. We'll see it in the current election here. We'll certainly in the election when it comes here. We certainly are seeing it in the election in the US. Migration's a huge issue. It's not going to go away in a rush, partly driven by poverty in many parts of the world, and younger people in particular who make those boat journeys to Europe at present. They're looking for a future, understandable. And then climate change too will cause disruption that'll further add to this problem of people migrating to survive. Pandemics are still around the corner. COVID hasn't left. Bird flu's here. It's having a devastating impact on the industry in Australia, but who knows what's next. On top of all of this is this falling trust in government. There was a 2023 survey by OECD. 44% of people in OECD countries had low or no trust, 39% moderate or high trust. So more people mistrust their government than trusted their government. This is alarming. What happens to democracy if people don't trust their government? How are decisions going to be made? Now, all of these problems, to some extent, existed in the past. The dilemma at the moment is the pace of some of these problems is increasing. Climate change is increasing alarmingly. And they're coming one on top of the other. They're interlinked. As I said, climate change produces problems about migration. Artificial intelligence not only does things in the military space, but does things in the way society is organised, in the decision-making in our own societies, and causes its own sorts of disruption within our economic frameworks. Social cohesion. One of the impacts of this is a decline in social cohesion. At the heart of that is people having a say in what their government does. If you want to build social cohesion, you let people have a say in the decision-making of the process. Yet more and more Australians and people internationally are feeling they're not in the decision-making process. So big problem, many big problems all coming together. Yep, thanks. So this hasn't bypassed the concerns of the UN. Antonio Guterres said in 2021, when he released Our Common Agenda, humanity faces a stark and urgent choice, break down or break through. At the centre of international cooperation, as reflected in the United Nations, they recognise that this is getting serious. We need to do something about it. The choices we make or fail to make today could result in further breakdown and a future of perpetual crises, or a breakthrough to a better, more sustainable, peaceful future for our people and our planet. Part of the reason why Our Common Agenda was released in 2021 and why it was developed was COVID in 2019-20 had a big impact on the progress that had been made on the Sustainable Development Goals. There had been a good response internationally. People were starting to address that range of 17 issues. and the goals that have been set by the international community, but it fell away through COVID. Understandable. People were preoccupied with surviving and trying to reduce the impact of COVID. So the momentum was lost for the Sustainable Development Goals. Part of the reason for our common agenda is to try and turbocharge the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. Of course, one of those is certainly peace and security. 16 is peace and security. Our common agenda led to a process that will come to fruition in the Summit of the Future. So initially, our common agenda, which is well worth reading, it's quite readable, it's available online, traces out some of these problems. The next step was to do a series of 8 discussion papers called New Agendas. There's a new agenda for peace and security, a new agenda for youth, and so on. So there's a range of discussion papers, again, all available online. I've read thoroughly the peace and security one, and it's great. You know, there's good ideas in it. It gives a bit of a vision of where things could head. So these provided the foundation for the Summit of the Future. Thank you. And in this process, so it goes from our common agenda through discussions within the nations, the members of the UN, through the new agenda items to raise specific areas of issues, to then wanting to come together in a summit to discuss it, and a summit which will adopt a pact for the future. Summit of and pact for. So the pact is for the future. And that will be adopted in New York. It's currently being negotiated. It's up to the 2nd revision. So they launched it in January or February this year. There was a revised version May or so, and now the revision 2 has come out in July. Some of the future, as I've already said, the Summit of the Future boosts the Sustainable Development Goals, a recommitment to peace and security at the heart of the UN, and Article 1 of the UN Charter is about peace and security. The reason the UN was established was to make sure that countries didn't go to war anymore, to try and avoid the war that had been fought in the Second World War. Peace and security is at the heart of the UN. So a recommitment to that, and related to it, is to rethink how best the UN can contribute. PBC is Peace Building Commission. So in rethinking about how can the UN respond to these situations of conflict, how can we do better at this peace and security game? What's the role of the Peace Building Commission, which hasn't been around that long, 2005, I think it was established. And so the discussions there's a lot of discussions going on about reform of the Peace Building Commission. That's really important because Australia is going to sit on the Peace Building Commission from next year. It's been elected to the body, and it'll sit on the committee, council, board, whatever they call it, for the Peace Building Commission for 2 years. So Australia is in a situation where it can have a say on how the UN could improve on peace and security. The Peace Building Commission makes recommendations to the Security Council. Security Council is the key body in the UN, certainly for peace and security. It has lots of problems. In discussion, no doubt we'll raise the issues of the Security Council. We'll come to a little. So the Peace Building Commission becomes quite important as a step. Control of new technologies, particularly AI. Laws is lethal autonomous weapon systems. There's push for a treaty. These need to be controlled. They're out of control. They get into the hand. They're such, this weaponry can get into the hands of anyone, basically. It's so different to nuclear technology, which is high tech, needs particular technical expertise. These things can be made in people's backyards using stuff bought at the supermarket or whatever. Lethal autonomous weapon systems are getting into lots of different hands. And if you read anything about how they're being used in Gaza, it's pretty alarming. Empowerment of young people. There's recognition that young people are basically being excluded from the decision-making processes. We need to do something about it. we need to ensure that they have a say, because they're going to have to live with the world we've created for them, unfortunately. We haven't done a good job of leaving a great legacy for the next generation in terms of what was on the first page of this. Reform of UN architecture, particularly the UN Security Council. I think anyone who knows anything about the UN knows that the UN Security Council has one big problem: it has veto powers. And the same countries exercise their veto power whenever it comes close to a decision. One side or the other exercise the veto power, end of story. That's it. Think how much sooner we might have got a solution in the Middle East, in the Gaza-Israel conflict, if there hadn't been veto powers. Both sides of the Soviets and the US have exercised veto powers in different votes in the UN Security Council. Thanks. So, this is bringing it back home. Am I watching my time very well? Yeah, you're right. This is bringing it back home now. So to try and address these, the Australian Institute for International Affairs and the ACT, together with the Initiative for Peace Building at Melbourne Uni and the United Nations Association, are convening this roundtable in Canberra at the ACCC, the Australian Centre for Christianity and Culture in Barton, on the 6th of August. We're mainly focusing on peace and security and in the summit and also in the Pact of the Future. We've prepared 6 briefs, which are all available online. They're not all quite available online yet. They will be, some are up already, on international law and human rights, diplomacy, disarmament, both nuclear disarmament and chemical. No, nuclear disarmament and proliferation weapons. We're focusing on Peace Building Commission and reform of the UN Security Council. So what's next? 2024 in September is the summit. Late 24, DFAT's agreed, DFAT's coming to the round table. So we will have a discussion around each of those themes, and they've offered, both from the UN area and from the disarmament area, to respond and to contribute to the discussions. We've also got agreement from DFAT that they will hold a debrief after the summit to give us their view of what came out of it, what was beneficial, how did it go. We're trying to ensure that there's regular roundtable briefings for peace organisations, peace building, peace-making organisations, however you wish, conflict prevention, with DFAT. We want to up the discussion between Australians and the government on peace and security. It's kind of fallen off the table a bit in recent years. It's time to get it back on the table and to get a dialogue going and to encourage Australia to take braver action in the international arena, to be more courageous in support of peace and security. Australia is not a threat to anyone. Australia has the voice of many of the key players. It has a good relationship with the US, it has a good relationship with the UK, a good one with France, and so on. So Australia can use its voice internationally with the big players, and we think it should. Australia's centred in Asia, or our nearest neighbour, bar Asia Pacific, including the Pacific, bar New Zealand. They're developing countries. We have good relations with them. We can build relationships with them further. Australia needs to take a more active role in building peace and security. That's my argument, and I think many heads are nodding. We can contribute more, but it needs us to say to our government, let's be more courageous. Let's go for peace and security. Let's forget about preparing for war all the time. Yes, there's a place for that. I'm not anti having a defence force. Yes, there's a place for a defence force, but let's not get it out of whack so we think that's the only way to respond to any potential risk that appears on the horizon is to get a bigger gun. No, let's talk about risks. Let's get into risk aversion. Let's get into risk reduction and into diplomacy. That's where we need to move. So we hope to create a dialogue, and then, as it said right at the bottom there, After Australia was on the Peace Building Commission for 2 years, which is a close relationship with the UN Security Council, it then is applying for a seat on the UN Security Council in 2028. It'll run a campaign. It was there in some years ago, can't remember. On that occasion, Australia got its votes from African nations, 53 African nations that helped Australia get onto their votes to support Australia's election. The dilemma was that we offered them scholarships, aid, embassies, the lot, basically. Not every country, but a fair whack of them. And we got their votes and we got elected. Soon after that, I think there was a change of government and we pulled out the scholarships and closed a few embassies. I don't think the Africans are going to get stuck again for that sort of nonsense. We have to build a more sensible relationship. The Peace Building Commission provides an opportunity to do that. We can't go around with a bag of lollies and think people are going to vote for us. We've got to build better relationships. Thank you. So finally, I think I'm pretty well on time. Finally, the Peace and Security Forum, just to mention it. Australian Peace and Security Forum, recently formed, foster discussion around a comprehensive national security, peace and security strategy. There used to be a national security strategy. We now want to call it national peace and security strategy. Back in the Gillard government, it was adopted. There was one adopted. It's kind of got a bit old now. We've developed and adopted a national security structure, which is all about military security. But as I said in the first slide, there's a couple of other big issues that impact our security. So promote discussion, contribute to development of a comprehensive national peace and security policy and strategy, provide government and public with expert advice from civil society. Let's get the community involved. If you want social cohesion, get the community involved in the process of policy making. Thanks. So these are the kind of interlocking areas. We're not foolish enough to think we can do everything. There's lots of other organisations involved in this field. What we're arguing is that there needs to be a comprehensive approach so that people in the public have confidence that the government is responding to this complex of issues that are so interlinking. So there's climate security. This is the slide that I said to Heath earlier that I drew it up and then I thought, oh, I could improve on that. So you kind of can see that it's climate and environment security at the top. We need to deal with issues like biodiversity. One of the impacts of climate, of course, is water. That's the first impact of climate, and the most severe impact is the availability of fresh water. If we don't have sufficient water, we won't have sufficient food. Australia knows that story well. Many other countries are discovering the significance of having available fresh water for survival. There's economic security. We've got to deal with inequality somehow. Migration is going to be around. Fragile states, they kind of, when you have gross inequality, you have significant migration issues. You have a fragile state, migration increases. You know, look around the world. Look at the situation of Haiti these days, Somalia. Some of these countries, you know, how are they going to get through? AI, it has an impact, both on the economy, but also into security questions. International security, this is where I changed words somewhat. You know, diplomacy, conflict prevention is what we really want to do. We want to prevent conflicts, peace building or conflict prevention. Military security is important, but it's not the only player it's not the only card in the deck. The rule of law is important. That's international cooperation. Human security, health, education, belonging, social cohesion. I've changed some of these too. But you get the gist of it. We're still working out what is it we're really on about. What we want to see is some sort of national peace and security strategy that helps us all understand how do these interlinking big risk items, how do they fit together? How does government deal with them? In the UK, they have a national risk assessment, which they do. And they go through all of these. It's a reasonable size volume, but it's not overwhelming. So in one sense, people can understand a certain level of what the problem is. And I think people can then understand how the government's responding. Part of the dilemma of what climate change, I think, represents is that it's going to be communities that have to respond to it. When climate change impacts such as fires and floods happen in Australia, the government's not well placed to respond everywhere with equal capacity. It's just too much. It's just too big of a challenge. Governments do what they can. I'm not being critical of governments. I'm just recognising the reality of what a major flood or a major fire means. Communities have to respond in the first place. They're the ones that have to fight the fires, help the people who've been impacted by floods. When the flooding and the fire finishes, they're the ones that get life back together again, that rebuild the community. Communities are crucial to our future. And it's the same internationally. If the international community doesn't exist, if people don't work to solve these problems together, they're just going to get bigger. So there's a sense in which if we can get an overall picture, make it pretty simple and help people understand how community is at the heart of this process, helping others to face these problems, both locally, regionally, nationally, internationally. We've got to push that because some of the pathways we're heading down at present, I don't think will get us to where we want to get. We want to get to a peaceful and secure Australia, peaceful and secure world. It's not impossible. We just need to be determined to get there and not where the other possibility may lie. Thanks.
Great. Thanks very much, Russell. It's a great basis for a discussion of the many and various different problems that's part of the peace and security agenda, I suppose. So we'll open it to questions. If people could just let us know who they are and speak up. So we're not using the microphone tonight. Okay, so do speak up so we can hear you online. I'll take Rosemary and then Rod. Indeed. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Rosemary and I have a defence background. But this is what I'm really interested in, this roundtable on the 6th of August. Who's coming? Who will be there? Who's been invited to be the main, you know, where is the power coming from at that roundtable?
That's a range of questions. The three organisations I mentioned, including Australian Institute for International Affairs, United Nations Association, and I'm involved with the Initiative for Peace Building, Melbourne University. We've issued fairly broad invitations. Any organisation that we knew or had links to, we issued broad invitations. It's a pretty open, this one. We had a roundtable in February where it was invitation only. Now this one's quite open. We want to involve more people in the process. We've got around 80 face-to-face registrations and about 120, 130, I haven't seen the latest figures, online registrations. So, I think there's going to be about 200 people. We were mainly aiming for face-to-face because if we want to build community, you've got to get people face-to-face. Online's fine, has its place. I'm not a critic. I'm just saying if you want to build community, you've got to have relationships. And the only way you can do that is people face-to-face. And so where's the power coming from? The desire for peace and security in Australia.
I just wondered if there were prominent people who've been asked to.
Yeah, there's a whole range of speakers. I don't have the program on there, but the program's available online if you go to the Initiative for Peace Building at Melbourne University.
Yeah, well, there's a mix of people who are involved with the United Nations. Some of them will be coming in online, people with a long involvement in the UN.
Yeah,
and then there are local people in the social justice and activism field as well.
I can probably think of some names if you want to go to names, but a fairly broad range of people from activist organisations like WILF, Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, people from academia, is a crossover, Tillman Ruff, who's both ICAN, International Campaign Against Nuclear Weapons, and also Melbourne Uni. Matilda Byrne, who is coordinator for Killer Robots campaign. She's doing the weapons stuff. So a range of people like that.
Thank you.
Matthew Newhouse from the ANU at the moment, a former DFAT, senior DFAT officer. So It's an
Couple of
impressive,
ex-defenders, yeah.
yeah, it's an impressive group, for sure. Okay, Rod.
Rod Polsko, we knew each other all
Yeah,
the
we
time
know
ago,
each other.
Russell.
We still do.
I was in the Environment Department, and I was involved with the preparation of the UN 1992 UN Summit on the Global Summit on the Earth Summit, so called, head of state. And then I worked with the UN in the UN Summit on Sustainable Development, Johannesburg in 2002. So I've been through 2 global summits, which involve looking at all these issues. They were big, huge preparation in national meetings all around the world, and a lot of government involvement. And yet, to be quite frank, I'm not sure where they all got to in the end. And then we had more recently which I wasn't involved, the Sustainable Development Goals, and much more recently. There was a process, I believe, for the government responding to progress on those goals through DFAT. My understanding, there's some work I've done, is that there's not much happening in that area at all now. Then there's the Australian body, the Commission for the Human Future, Bob Douglas and others. Some very prominent people, and that sort of feel like I'm throwing a lot of cold water, because I'm really concerned about the issues you raised, and that you're right, they are the most important, far more important than regional military security and some of the foreign affairs sort of issues. But just wish you well, but I can't help being a bit pessimistic, and we've got to keep going, obviously, plugging away. But how do we? But we've got all these distractions that are terrible as they are. With Gaza and Ukraine, it's distracting from dealing with some of these fundamental issues of global poverty, of AI and climate change, and so on. So I suppose I'm saying I'm being pessimistic. I don't know what you can say around the pessimism.
Don't give up hope.
Never.
No, and that's the critical thing. The sustainable, I mean, to some extent, what happened is COVID in 1920 stopped the world to some extent. It stopped people meeting. Everyone went online. That stopped a lot of dynamics. Travel, trade, they're all impacted severely. International cooperation was severely impacted. People didn't travel to meetings. And I think, I'm not trying to portion blame on anything. I just think we have to reflect on what happened. It put a stop to things for a period. And I think people are still coming out of that period, frankly. And I would argue that, yeah, the Sustainable Development Goals, a lot of those international climate change to some extent too. But Sustainable Development Goals fell behind. And that's why Guterres said, we've got to do something about this. Climate change, probably the international debate around climate change may have slipped through that period. The trouble was climate change didn't go away through that period. In fact, some of the threats became even greater. And the impacts, the scale of flooding that we've seen this year in many countries across the world, not just poor countries, but, Sweden, Italy, fires in Canada and the US, and you can go through the long list. You've seen it all on television. It has its impact. People are realising that the climate is changing. We do have to respond somehow. There's desperation for some people. The people who watch glacial sheets or ice sheets in the Arctic and in the Antarctic, they're getting pretty disturbed. In this morning's Guardian, I read the story of the scientists who work on reefs. 70% of them are dying or being bleached or something of that order. What do we do now is the question. It's an obvious question. What do people concerned about reefs do now? They've spent their lifetime. So the issues are getting worse. The choice we face is, are we going to live through collapse or are we going to do something about it? On none of these issues are we on the cliff. We're still the lemming running towards it, I feel, but we're not to the edge of the cliff. And that becomes my message, and what I think we all need to take to heart is, look, we can do something about it. Sure, things are difficult, But if we don't tackle it, we know they're going to get far, far worse. The reality is on all of these questions, things could be better. They can stay the way they are, but they can be better. Let's do what we can to make them better. And I think on all of those things, yeah, I know it's pretty depressing. I watch the news at night too, you know, sometimes just leave the room. I can't stand this anymore. But we're going to get up tomorrow and the world's going to be the same way it is. And some of these problems are going to be slightly larger than they were when we went to bed last night. And all of us are going to face this reality. We're going to do it for our kids because this is it.
I agree.
And Desmond, can you inject some positivism?
Well, that I could. Russell, nobody but a fool would deny the force of your argument. And what you say and what Guterres is saying, clearly, you know, we are living through extraordinarily difficult times in all the areas that you've mentioned, climate, social disaster, the new technologies which are so threatening, lots and lots of things. I come to the question of disarmament. I would make the case that both nuclear and conventional arms stocks have been massively diminished in the years since I was serving in Europe, in NATO, in the 1990s. Ukraine willingly gave up its nuclear weapons and they were taken away, dealt with by the Americans and disabled. You could make a case for saying that had that never happened and had the Ukrainians had nuclear weapons, they would not be fighting a war and that in fact it would have been a preserver of peace. You would know from your time in India that India and Pakistan fought war after war after war until they both became nuclear capable. Now, this isn't a defense of nuclear weapons. It's merely stating the obvious, which is that they do have deterrent capabilities. One British Labour government or party after another wanted unilateral nuclear disarmament, Michael Foot and all sorts of people. And the British nuclear deterrent has been run down to it's barely viable. It exists as much in theory as in practice. The French force de frappe still exists. Given the vagaries of the nuclear umbrella, nobody would wish those weapons to go away at the moment. So the question of disarmament is very difficult. And Australia does live under a kind of a nuclear umbrella. We don't enunciate it as such, but the reality is that our great and powerful friend is not about to see Pine Gap taken out by a nuclear weapon. My general point is that though all these other issues are going on at the same time, we can't take our eye off the fact that we do need to keep up our own guard and rebuild it. You know, the Chinese are laying down a larger number of hulls per annum than the Royal Navy has. So you can't make the case for saying that it was the West's failure to disarm that has galvanized China and Russia and North Korea into their postures. They've done that quite unilaterally. My concern is we, the world, should disarm. But if we, the West, disarm, as we did in the 1920s, that doesn't have a very good track record of deterring aggression.
Probably easy to answer Rod's question. Couple of things. It's interesting, just to pick up on one small point. Yes, you're right about Ukraine and nuclear weapons. One other country got rid of its nuclear weapons. You know which one that was?
South Africa.
Yeah. South Africa got rid of its nuclear weapons when it became independent. So, and perhaps Ukraine's decision. What do you say? Do you say that was foolish or that was wise? It's a hard one to pick, isn't it? Because if they'd kept their nuclear weapons, Russia might have treated them differently. Because they didn't keep their nuclear weapons, then the threat, even though it's been made, is perhaps not as serious as it might have been if both states were nuclear.
Well, there might have been no cross-border aggression at all.
That's a possibility, isn't it? We'll never, unfortunately, never know the answer to that question. I guess that the issue that's at the heart of it for me is what sort of future world do we want, and where do we need to put our resources to get that? Now, there is an argument to say some of those resources might need to go to defence. I accept that. But I think there's also a strong argument to say a lot of those resources need to go to some of these other issues that are related to peace and security, climate change, pandemics, the global economy, etc. So, and what's more, we should be involved in that decision making. Our government has committed $35 million a day for the next 30 years for one particular weapon, or 20 of them, or whatever it is, 10, I don't know the number. That's extraordinary. That's a massive investment of your resources, which you were not involved in making the decision at all. Now, maybe you all agree that that's the best use of those resources. My suspicion is you may not. And that's where it all gets out of whack. Yes, there certainly was a significant reduction in nuclear weapons after the wall came down, and the world rejoiced about that. It's a pity that that stopped. It could be started again, and I think there's a strong argument to try and start it again. The reality is that some countries are starting to build up their nuclear stocks. Now's a good time, it seems to me, to argue, let's not do it.
Tell Xi Jinping he's tripling the number of nuclear
I know.
warheads he's got. Yeah.
But
Dialogue's not going to.
I've always got to ask myself about China. When you ask yourself this question, where does China have military bases outside its own territory? And ask yourself that about the United States. I'm not picking on the United States, but where does it have military bases outside its own territory? Where doesn't it have military bases outside its own territory? China doesn't have military bases outside its own territory. Sure, everyone says China's getting aggressive and all the rest of it, but
It
it
has
doesn't have
visiting
any.
rights.
Eh?
It has visiting rights in a lot of places in the Middle East.
But we've got those too.
Yeah.
We're not a threat to anyone. So
I
I think
accept
we've
your
got to-
general point that it's
I think we've
within
just
the
got to-
first island chain at the moment.
yeah, but that wasn't, as I understand, some of those 7 and 9 dot border was from way back in history, you know, like
9-dash lines.
9-9.
Nine-dash line is only ever something that the Chinese have asserted. It's not something anybody else has ever
Yes,
accepted, and they've been
the
denied
Taiwanese
that
also
at the
developed
UN.
that line too.
the
But, you
natives.
know, I don't want to sort of get into an argument about China, but I just think we've got to tone down the aggressive. There's two views in Australia about China, the hawks and the doves. I'm with the doves. I'm not sure the hawks are going to get us far. Because the issue is, yeah, I think if there is a nuclear war, fine, I wouldn't want to live in Alice Springs. I agree. That's the first place to go. But the real issue is the US going to protect San Francisco or Sydney? Which is it going to protect as a higher priority? And you can go around other American cities as well. So, you know, when you start to say it's deterrence and we're under the umbrella, gee, it's a pretty leaky umbrella. I think I'd like to be in the rain and under it. And so there's a real dilemma about all that talk, and I can't get into the whole nuclear design. You raise valid points. I still think that at the heart of it, we know that nuclear weapons have the capacity to destroy life as we know it. And how can we argue for that to increase our capacity to destroy life? We can do it already. Why do we need to increase it? So I just think the case for reducing the number of nuclear weapons, for encouraging weapon states to dismantle and not to test new weapons, I think it's a strong case.
Martin, did you have a
Yeah,
comment? Yeah.
I might take it. I don't know where to start really.
Finish.
I was going to ask a question about the UN Sustainable Development Goals, but some of the other comments you made, I can't let go of that challenging, particularly on climate change. You know, I think I really encourage people to do their own research on the science. And we're all told over COVID, follow the science. Well, actually look at the science on climate change, alleged climate change. How significant is it? How detrimental is it? And what are the measures we're actually taking? And don't just accept I'll use the woke, accepted green left agenda on this sort of matter, right? So look at actually look at the.
No more signalling, please.
Yeah, well, that's exactly, no more signals. Look, do your own research. Okay, that's the first thing. Secondly, the UN development goals. I mean, really, it's not one of the problems with them. Those 17, they're amorphous, almost impossible to conceptualize, let alone implement. I mean, read them. no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being. Well, it's all wonderful, wishful thinking, but put them into practice. How are you going to do that? You don't need 17 of them. You need 1 or 2 to actually achieve something. How about something like rid the world of TB, rid the world of malaria, an iPad for kids in third world countries so they haven't got a teacher, you know, some practical measures. I mean, really, have you anyone ever challenge? There's a great author, there's Bjorn Lomborg. Did anyone ever read any of his stuff? Well,
Now you know, we know where you're coming from.
well, I obviously don't read Australian, you must have time size, but anyway, let's just actually look at the science. The Copenhagen Institute that he heads is one source of alternative views from the Sydney Morning Herald and Channel 9 and the ABC. Get something with a little bit of alternative views. Do your own research is really what I'm saying. What you're saying is wonderful, it's applaudable, it's unfortunately wishful thinking in my view. Have 1 or 2 UN sustainable goals and implement them. The best thing UN can do to reform itself and make it better is to dissolve itself and start again. It's a complete basket case of wokeism and privilege and looking after your mates for jobs and graft and corruption. You all know that. Anyone who's been in DFAT knows that in his heart. But let's just get practical about the whole thing. Anyway, thank you for your presentation. But please do your own research, do a bit of independent thinking.
All right, we've got time for a couple of other
There's 3
questions.
comments.
Yeah.
Totally agree. Everyone do their own research. I've got no problem with that. I've done mine and I'm satisfied with where I got to as a result of it. But yeah, absolutely agree. On the UN, what about smallpox? You mentioned some others.
Yep.
Thanks to Fenner chairing a committee of the UN, the world was rid of smallpox.
Okay.
That was a UN achievement led by an Australian who's
That's
got
right.
his name all over ANU. The other one on the Sustainable Development Goals, the one I know best is 6, which is water.
Yep.
And I used to work on water in DFAT for 14 years almost.
Yep.
It was very useful.
Yep.
We did try and achieve those things and we made some inroads, not just on water and sanitation at the village level and countries where that's desperately needed, but also particularly on water resource management. You tell the people in the Murray-Darling Basin that they don't need water resource management, which is one of the key goals of the
Build dams.
SDG.
Well,
They're not allowed to build dams.
Yeah, but Australia's lucky it built all its dams in the 50s, didn't it? It's
Right.
extremely well resourced.
We can bog down into detail, but the point is.
But if you're going to say SDGs,
Yeah.
don't make it superficial. Bog
Yeah.
down into detail.
Oops, sorry, the last one.
Don't bog down into detail on the SDGs. Look at what actually is being done under each of those things.
Have this group of experts get together and actually make some decisions and exercise judgment about what is the priority. You don't have 17 priorities. You can't spread the funding or the resources, and it didn't stop because of COVID. It stopped because it was impractical.
UN's 100 and whatever, 53
Yeah.
countries, all of whom have a say in these things. Yes, that's the strength and weakness of the UN. You don't have authoritarian people saying, you do this, and I'll force you to do it. It's people have got to come together and say, we will do it because it's in our common interest to do it.
Yeah.
That's the strength of the UN.
There we go.
So you've got to choose what sort of world.
All
you
right,
want.
I just want to inject some questions from our online audience who
Oh,
are
okay.
out there watching as well. In particular, a couple of comments here about the rule of law and to what degree that's going to be a focus of discussion at the summit, and also the issue of overpopulation, to what degree that might be featuring in the UN's discussions about these matters.
There will be a focus on international humanitarian law, I'm sure, and it certainly is on the agenda, and it's on the agenda for our roundtable as well. International humanitarian law has gained a lot of focus recently, particularly with the decisions of the International Commission of ICJ, the International Court, and ICC. So yes, international humanitarian law and human rights law are important and are on the agenda, and we put them on our roundtable agenda as well. The second one,
Overpopulation is a.
no, I mean, the world's population is actually stabilizing at present. It's peaking. And it is an issue, but if we want to seriously address overpopulation, it's a very simple solution. We need to provide the resources for safe, reliable, affordable family planning.
And literacy.
Literacy too, for women and girls in particular. But if we provided all the people in the world who wanted to use safe, reliable, affordable contraception, there wouldn't be a overpopulation issue.
Keith, I think, had a question. And
Very
then,
point I was going to pick up. There's a trend going on at the moment in the, at least in the developed world, that at least long term and to some extent medium term will have a big effect. Yet apparently it's not getting any attention from anywhere. That's falling birth rates. I've read that Japan has already passed the population. I don't know. If it were possible to reduce world population to the level of the Industrial Revolution, then climate change ceases. Is there any study going on as to how far that has to come down before it intersects the climate change graph going up? And we're getting to some sort of break-even point. But my question is it,
Yeah.
it seems to be
I
getting no
understand.
attention. Is it getting any attention?
You're right. Several countries in the world are starting to plateau, including China, plateau in terms of growth rates. And Japan's facing a problem now where it's got an aging, its population bulge is moving into the post-retirement. And they're going to need people to keep their society running. The part of the dilemma is that climate change has been driven by the rich world, which doesn't have the overpopulation problem. It has the overconsumption problem. And so we always think of overpopulation as being a problem in the developing countries, but in terms of resource use per capita, it's nothing compared with what it is in a country like ours. We're amongst the highest per capita carbon emitters in the world. We are amongst the richest people in the world. We're sitting on top of the pyramid. So we have to face the reality that we need to change the way we use the world's resources. We can't go on living like this, because if we do, we're going to doom a lot of other people to a very miserable existence.
But our birth rate in Australia is only about, I think, 1.7, 1.8.
Well, I think
But below 2.2, the continued population.
haven't we dropped below replacement rate?
Yeah,
now?
yeah.
Apart from
But we have
migration.
migration.
Yeah, thank goodness we do.
Think about allowing migrants.
I think I'll have
we're
to.
only starting.
Let's start that.
Oh, one other point about our lifestyle. AI is enormously energy thirsty. You know, we're all into AI now. We're all going to have GPT on our phones and all the rest of that nonsense. But the amount of energy that it consumes is unbelievable. You know,
Like Bitcoin.
absolutely.
Hugely.
These sort of dream technologies, the cost on the environment is immense. And we don't want to face that yet, not just energy, but water as well. We need to face what the costs of some of these technologies are, and then ask ourselves whether they're important or not. Sorry.
No, Ed Rather.
Yeah.
Yes.
I had a question. So regarding, I'm from an economics and security background, and what interests me was seeing the youth empowerment section up there. And I was wondering, what would youth empowerment exactly look like from an economic perspective? Because, I mean, for example, while I was in PNG, youth empowerment at that point would be getting jobs for people there. I was seeing the UN there, from practical perspective, they were providing funding to SMEs. But these were businesses of 50 million to 200 million Kina minimum. And these businesses weren't employing fresh grads or any sort of youth per se. It wasn't really assisting the people that it needed to. And, there's a lack of small business funding for like actual small businesses that do, hire the youth, for example. And so I was just wondering, what would there be, like, what would it actually look like in terms of economic policies? Would it be sort of maybe a movement away from these larger SMEs down to like the micro SME level, or would it, apologies.
You've got a big career ahead of you. I don't know the answer to these questions. All I can say in response is young people around the world are having trouble finding jobs, and particularly in developing countries. And AI is displacing a lot of base level jobs, entry jobs, where people gain some experience to understand what it's like to be in a workforce and to work for someone. So whatever the economy does, it has to provide opportunities for young people to contribute and to work and to gain an income. And some people will go off and then say, what about a universal basic UBI, universal basic income? Yeah, it's a great idea, but it's going to be a hell of an argument to try and get that up. But why shouldn't everyone be entitled to an adequate standard of living? I mean, why You know, Elon Musk getting $52 billion a year in a paycheck, give us a break. That's ridiculous nonsense. We can't accept that in the world if we can. And young people are not getting jobs. So I can't really answer your question. But I mean, it is going to be SMEs, but we're still going to have huge corporations. It's hard to see them changing in a hurry. But the more we can find opportunities for people to contribute, you know, to some extent, I think at community level, local level is where the future is going to be made more than anywhere else.
Sorry if I could.
Yeah, just quickly, we've got
Yeah,
two more
quickly.
questions.
Would that
Question
then
is
look
coming.
like, you know, when consulting more of the locals, would that then be effectively like integrating them more within the UN's like planning process? Would that be more the case then, to try and actually see where the funding goes?
As much as I'll advocate for the role of the UN, I'm not sure integrating local processes into the UN is a good idea. I understand what the UN is. It's a huge bureaucracy. It has an important role to play. And sometimes important things get done by huge bureaucracies like the Australian government. UN's nowhere near the size of the Australian bureaucracy, nowhere near it. The budget of the UN in New York is the same as the city of New York. So, you know, it's not a big organisation by global standards. It's a tiny organisation with huge responsibilities. So, no, I don't think it'll be integration into any of the UN planning. Hopefully the UN can find ways to help local organisations who are trying to make progress. And there's lots of different things through all sorts of UNDP and ILO and a whole other agencies. So it's really at that level that I think that the useful resources, information, what's happened elsewhere can be fed into local communities.
Yes, please.
I'm just wondering, because throughout you have like a lot of experience throughout engaging, trying to promote multilateralism and people in organizations and countries try and work together to solve so many of the great challenges of our time. But thinking through a political lens, you have no doubt we've encountered a lot of political opposition, whether it be institutional. I'm sure you can think of a lot of examples along that. But even like it can be the ideas are like where the UN can be very susceptible to like populist rhetoric and scaring people away. In your experience, what do you think are some of have been the most effective ways to counter such like political resistance in a way that could bring confidence for the government to pursue more multilateral means of trying to address global problems?
Well, one thing in my experience, not that I've been experienced, other people in this room have had more experience in UN than I have, but I've had much involvement at all. I've had some. In my experience, marshalling the case you want to make based on facts is critical. I know these days facts are challenged,
Disinformation as well.
but we will not get anywhere unless we can agree on what facts are. I can take the example of water and borders in a river. People downstream always blame upstream for taking all the water and not letting it down to their farms. Unless you can establish the flows, when the flows are high, when the flows are low, unless you can establish the facts of that, you will not manage that stream. So facts are critical to making a case. Then you basically need to depend on good faith. There's always going to be people with political motives that will never perhaps reveal them to you or may reveal them to you, who will just say no to whatever it is. But, you know, what can you do? All you can do is make the case, establish the facts, find other ways to make the argument, get more allies who support your case, and keep making the case. As far as I can, more my experience, the only way you get to where you want to, even in small things that I've done, is to do that. Marshal your argument, be sure of your facts, and make your case. In politics, they say it once, say it twice, say it 3 times, and then keep on saying.
Okay, Dennis.
Good presentations. Thank you very much for that. You mentioned in one of your earlier slides was distrust in government. What's your or it's been done to diagnose distrust in government and come up with solutions or processes to increase trust in government in Australia?
We had a session in which we had a discussion on trust because of this very question you just raised. What is trust? How is it established? How is it maintained? We didn't come up with any magic bullets, unfortunately. But the one I will keep coming back to again and again on this question is trust develops when people are engaged. When people are engaged with each other, they slowly build trust. It can easily be broken. And you can all think of at the personal level or even in organisations, how trust can so easily be broken by telling a lie, playing a backdoor game or whatever. It's easy to do. But the only way it can be built is by people working together, sharing their views, listening to each other, and building some sense of community. You may not share the same view, you may not agree. You don't need to come to agreement to have a community. You need to accept where that person's coming from, and you need to be confident about where you're coming from, and then you look for a common ground to move forward. So I think the dilemma with trust in government is perhaps the COVID to some extent contributed to this too. The government had no choice but to make decisions for the good of the community. It didn't really have time to go out and broadly consult. Now, you can argue this point, I know, and many have argued already. But government basically took the leadership role and said, we will do these things and you have to do them. And that created reaction. So that broke down some trust. The only way that, as far as I can see, that's going to be established if government starts to engage with the community about policy making and decision making again. We want our government to be more responsive. We're a democracy. We don't just want to have a say every 3 years. We want to have a say when you're in power as well. Yeah, we're not going to make the decisions. Don't get carried away with it. We're not going to make decisions. We've elected you to make decisions. But we want to know how you're arriving at these decisions, and we want to have our say on how you should arrive at these decisions. So I think trust in our society will only be built by people having discussions face to face, not online. Everyone online usually is doing something else. Well, they're taking off their camera. Their name's there, but they're off doing something else. So, that's not the way to do it. It's got to get face to face, and we've got to build trust by talking to each other, understanding that other people have a different perspective. It's worth listening to. You may not agree with it, but it's worth listening to.
Well, on that positive note, I think we
Poor
might
Martin's been sitting
draw
there
a line.
all night.
Sorry, Martin, I sense you might have had the chance to talk to Russell earlier, but we have in fact, unfortunately, run out of time. Russell, you've got an enormous challenge ahead of you. I think we have. As a community, we have.
Indeed.
And in also building that trust from the community level through the government to hopefully affect change. So the discussion will continue. The address, by the way, for the 6th of August roundtable is up there on the board. One of our online members wanted to know where that was. That's indeed the Australian Centre for Christianity and Culture in Barton. And Russell can provide details of how to register for that event on set. So it's an event that starts at 9:30 in the morning and goes through to 4 p.m. Or 5 p.m. actually. So if you are interested in continuing the discussion, throwing your ideas forward, this is one positive way, one pragmatic way of doing it. So on that note, let me thank Russell for coming and stimulating a very interesting debate tonight, and a small memento of our appreciation for coming. Thank you very much. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have 2 events in August. There is an international careers and international affairs event at the University of Canberra coming up. We're gearing that to students and to young professional people, but it's open to all. And there might be some students here who are interested in coming as well. It's a free event. And we have some fantastic speakers who are going to tell us all about their trajectories into the international environment and what skills they worked up and how they helped get those jobs. And then at the end of August, on the 28th of August, in fact, dovetails nicely with Russell's presentation today. The CEO of the Australian Council for International Development will be speaking to us about Australia's International Development Aid Assistance Program. So we can continue some hard line of questioning for Mark Purcell when he comes. I hope we can see you there for that as well. In the meantime, good evening.